Hello, everyone. Welcome to Real Talk Food Safety with Tia and Jill.
Hello and welcome. We're so glad to have you with us today.
Yes, we are. We are. And we have been, you know what? We've been traveling a lot actually in the month of October. So we've been pretty busy.
Yeah, end of September. So thank you for enjoying some of our like from the vault replays. Weren't
Yes.
those awesome?
Yes, yes. Those are some of my favorite ones.
Hmm.
And also to like remind you, right? Because we do this every week, you all know. And there's just so many great nuggets. And sometimes it's like it's hard to go back and listen to because you have so much going on. So I
Hmm.
love it when we pull some out from the vault because you're like, oh yeah, I remember that conversation and like so many great nuggets to take along and really use right in your day to day.
Well, and what I like is that every time you listen, it's like when you read a book, you pull out different parts of the story or different information, right? Because you're in a different place. Your
Mhm.
awareness is a bit different.
Mhm.
Somebody's message might land a little bit different.
Yes.
And so even if you're like, gosh, I've already done that. I mean, granted, we've all had things where we're like, yeah, we don't need to do it again. But when you do, right, usually there's something different that you can pick up or take away.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Mhm.
So these are like, I mean, it's one of the reasons we save our recordings, right? So that people can go back and
Yeah.
there's many times we have a guest and I'm like trying to like write down notes, but it's like it's all on replay, right? You can get
It
all of
is.
these replays on our blog. They're on our YouTube channel. And so you can go back and review and like you said, even when you go into a new role or you have a new project that you might just want to review.
Yeah, which it's actually kind of a tie into our topic today because, right, your people aren't where you're at.
Yes.
It's always
Yes.
about being in these different spaces or different mindsets or like how do we recognize that?
Yes, yes. And
Hmm.
as we kind of go into the topic, this kind of came up because we've been traveling.
Hmm.
We said that we've been traveling, and we were having some conversations. We actually did a workshop on your inner critic, and so
Self-talk.
it, yeah, self talk, right?
Mhm.
And a piece of that was your inner critic, that almost that alter ego inside of you that's telling you that your opinion doesn't matter or you're not great at what you do, you're not good enough, don't apply for that
Who do you
promotion.
think you are? Yeah.
Exactly. All of those things. And we had, always we have such great engagement and participation as people explore those things. But one leader had said that they felt like it was too elementary,
Mhm.
that people should know not to let their inner critic take over. And by now they should almost know these things.
Mhm.
And that kind of got me thinking about like one of the mistakes that leaders make is that we assume, right? Like we assume that, oh, because we know these things as a manager, other managers should know these things. Or because we knew these things when we were a supervisor or when we were a lab technician, or when we were a senator, then other people should know because now they're in that position.
Mhm.
Or even like my last director knew that, right? My last VP, they knew that, they handled that type of work. And then when you get a new VP, for whatever reason, you assume that they know the exact same thing that your last VP knew.
Oh,
You know,
interesting. Yeah, because I wouldn't assume that people know those things necessarily all the time, but I think we assume people know more than we think they do or from a different perspective.
yeah, yeah. And it's
So,
because we've been living these lives, right? And it's like you don't know what you don't know, right? You don't know that there's other perspectives out there. But like when you really think about it, we have different backgrounds, right? We
yeah.
grew up in different cultures. We've had different experiences, right? Some people have stayed at an organization for 20 years. Some people saw 5 different organizations in 20 years. And so, like, all of that knowledge and differences, right? They show up differently. And when we
Yeah.
assume that, oh, you should be where I am, I think sometimes we miss things for sure because we're assuming, and we all know what assume means.
Yeah. Well, and I think about the perspective. I think one way that I've had it explained that I think is a really tangible way is like these are my Jill glasses. I only see with Jill. If I take them off, I see something different. If I
Mm,
put your glasses on, right, it's a different perspective.
yes.
And so I think even just to think about how our perspectives are so different.
Yeah.
But I also go back to a good friend who used to always say, assume nothing, teach everything.
Mm.
Like that was the foundational principle that they lived by because like you said, every time we assume,
Yeah. Yeah.
um, but it's also because that way we take that assumption out because that just leads to miscommunication, that leads to like not meeting expectations. Like there's a lot of like disappointment and challenges around making these assumptions that people know, or
Yeah.
even thinking, gosh, I think that's where you are.
Yeah. Yeah.
So for example, I think about how many times people sit in a room and Tia, right? We've been talking a lot about succession planning and working on that with folks
Mhm.
where they're like, well, I think this person, like, they're ready for this, or I assume they know this, or I assume they're ready for this. And you're like, we know nothing.
Right. Yeah. Yes.
We don't even know if they want that role.
Yes. And it's I feel like it's human behavior, right? It's human behavior to kind of see our perspective and take it in, right? And try to put that on everyone, right? I think we just naturally do that as humans. But as leaders, we have to step back, right? And we have to say, like, I love that saying of assume nothing, teach everything, because it just reminds you that people are in different places, right? And they might be where you're at, and you'll know it once you start to teach it because people will be like, oh, yes, I've seen that before. Yes, I know how to do that, right? Okay, move on to the next thing.
Mm-hmm.
And that's so important to do as a leader because exactly what you said, Jill, it leads to miscommunication, right? And, low, um, not fulfilling expectations because
Yeah.
like if you assume that someone knows how to do something, right? Like it might not live up to your expectations because you've assumed, right? Like I feel like
Yeah.
that's the word.
And I think it goes, from things that are, really critical to things that maybe aren't. So,
Yeah.
for example, I remember with a direct report, kind of assuming that they knew how to write this report.
Mm.
So, right, they took a stab at it, they sent it to me, and I was like, huh.
Yeah.
Which,
Maybe I should have talked to them a little more about this.
right, but this was because I was making assumptions about, because they had been in the role, because of what they had done before. Just I made assumptions. I was not like they were not where I was at.
Yes.
But I've also had it like on things much more critical, like someone who is like had been in a role for a long time and thought they were taking some necessary actions on product that were not authorized to take that action on product. Right.
Yeah.
And I assumed that they knew that because they'd been in the role for a long time. Like we talked about it all the time. And then all of a sudden I'm like, what just happened here?
Right.
But part of it was that assumption, like, oh, well, of course, we're all professionals here. We're all on the
Mhm.
same page of what this means and what we would do. But that clearly wasn't true.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so as a leader, when I think about like where people are at, whether it's, something critical like a procedure or on a policy, but it even applies to things like where they are emotionally and where they are, mentally when it comes to showing up for work or being in this space together. And I think sometimes that part, because of course we're here, we talk about food safety culture a lot. I
Mhm.
think that part often gets missed.
Yes. Yes. I mean, this is just such a big topic because it's like it influences all of that,
Mhm.
right? Like it influences everything even around like culture, right? Like if you're going in and you're just assuming that people understand things, right? Like I'm just even thinking about like the inner critic, right? And
Mm.
self-talk. If
Yeah.
you assume that everyone has that figured out, then you're probably not paying attention to the people that continues to sit quietly in meetings and
Yeah.
not share their opinion. You probably aren't paying attention to the person that hasn't talked about a promotion in years. It's like these things that we miss as a leader
Yeah.
because we just assume, well, when I'm ready for promotion, I'll talk about it.
Hmm.
That's not everyone's experience.
No. Nope, not at all. So I love that today we're going to talk about all of those things because inevitably, if you haven't experienced this already or you have, I mean, even something like somebody who quits and you're like, wow, we didn't see that coming.
Yes.
Well,
Yeah.
guess what? Because they were somewhere else compared to where like where you thought they were, they weren't.
Yes. Yeah.
So,
Absolutely. Like what? I can't believe this person quit. Well, if you understood where they were, you probably would have picked up on some signs,
yeah.
right? Assuming, but because some people assume, well, if someone's about to leave, they'll stop doing their work, or if someone's about to leave, they'll let me know, or if someone's about, but that is not
Or they're going to
necessarily
complain or all kinds of stuff. But
exactly,
nope.
exactly. Yep. Yeah. So we wanted to just have a conversation about it today. That's what we do. That's what we do on Wednesdays, right? We want to talk about the things that are impacting food safety and food safety culture. And we love for you to be a part of the conversation. So please put in the comments,
Yeah.
where are you listening from? Add your comments, add your questions, add your perspectives as we have this conversation. If you're watching on replay, just use a little hashtag replay so we know that's what you're doing, and share
Yes.
because we want to hear your perspectives. We have our own perspectives that we share, but we love to hear yours because it just makes it a well-rounded conversation.
Yes. And, if it is your first time joining us, welcome. We
Welcome.
love having you here with our Catalyst community because here's where we talk all about like how do we help transform people in how they lead in food,
Yes.
right? Because here's the thing, so many of us have been trained as technical experts, and
Mm-hmm.
now we're being asked with food safety culture and just what humans want as work and generations progress and evolve is they want technical leaders,
Yeah.
right? People who really not only are fantastically aware and understanding of all of the technical elements of our role, but also the human side so that we can build better connections. We can foster more collaboration. We can help take care of the whole being of
Yeah.
people, not just their well being.
Right.
And so
Yes.
to do that, though, we have to be willing to do things different, but you also need support and a pathway to do that. And that's what we do here at Catalyst. We are that solution to really help develop your people in a different way.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And Jill, when you say technical people,
Mhm.
who are these technical people we help?
Well, of course, it's not just food safety. A lot of people are like, "Oh, do you just help people in food safety?" Like, nope, quality. We've engineers, R&D, sensory, packaging, operations, lab, like service, support systems. Like we've had people from across the food
Wow.
industry that have been part. It's people at the plant, it's people at corporate, it's people who are remote, it's people even in sales. So like I don't want to say we're not a one size fits all, but what we do really different is right, we're coaching based.
Mm-hmm.
So we're going to ask you tough questions.
Yes.
And
Yes.
because of where we're at, it's all practical and relatable for the industry we're in.
Yes. That's the big thing. And that's it's one of our values as an organization is to make sure that we are relatable,
Mm-hmm.
and practical. But that's like the one of the top feedbacks that we get is that I'm really able to take what you've talked about in your leadership development curriculum or in your workshops or at the events that you speak at. I am able to take that information and actually apply it to my job, and
Yeah.
I don't have to think about it and kind of, like I always think about the leadership courses I've taken over the years. I have to really be savvy about how that really relates to me being a sanitation manager or
Mm-hmm.
how it really relates to me being a quality director.
Yeah.
But what we do is we connect those things for you. So you don't have to think about does it relate to what I'm doing or how does it relate? We talk about, hey, like where you are right now as a quality director or as a quality engineer or as a lab technician or as an engineering support, where you are right now, your person might not be there. And this is what it
Yes.
looks like in your application. And so we take pride in that. And we love it because this is also our passion, right? Like we're also those nerds, those technical nerds, and we love talking about these things. So it allows us to be in this space and talk about things that we're passionate about while
Yeah.
also helping people step into technical leadership?
Well, that's because we've been there. I mean, once again, we haven't been in exactly your shoes, but we've been in spaces where we felt undervalued or overworked or that we couldn't influence effectively enough, or places where we've done it really well and we're like, wow, how do we help others do that? And so
Mm-hmm.
by figuring all of that out, that's why we're here, which really goes to what we're talking about today, because a lot of people aren't going to talk about like where you're at is different than where your other people are at. And when I
Yeah.
say other people, whether it's direct reports, people you collaborate with, just people on teams that you work with, doesn't mean it has to be, direct reports or subordinates,
Right.
that old icky manager term.
But
Because this is the human side of talking about people's emotions and mental and spiritual states of how I'm showing up for work.
yeah, and that's all important, especially as we talk about culture,
Yeah.
right? Because that's what makes culture is people. And if you are not connected to your people and wherever they are, right, in a way that makes sense to them, if you're not connected to them, then we cannot move food safety culture forward.
No.
It doesn't matter how great your programs are, how well they're written. If you're not connected to the people, culture is not moving forward.
No. And I love is like, right, we were just talking to someone right before we jumped on here, and they were talking about how they had been identified as a high performer at their role, but because they weren't getting the support to help with barriers and helping with some of these other things that we've all encountered, then they kind of felt a little bit guarded, like they couldn't show up as the best version of themselves because they were getting messages from people around them like that maybe they weren't as valuable, or that maybe they were pushing too hard, or they were asking for too much. And I
Yeah.
think it's so important because, like, did anybody see that this person wasn't where they thought they were at?
Yeah. Yes. Yes. I
And
mean,
for this person to show up and feel guarded and feel like they had to tiptoe and they couldn't be who they wanted to be and do the work that they knew they could do
yeah.
because of this
Right. Yeah.
junkyard.
Right. Yeah. If their leader was all about like, well, if this person feels guarded, then, they can say something, or I would say something in this situation. But there's so many things that go into that, right?
Yeah.
And like that person has their own experiences, right? They've talked to different people in the organization. And when someone feels like they can't show up as their whole self, right, then we've already missed the mark on culture, but you're also missing out on that high performer. Like you're missing out on all their talents and their gifts that they could be giving to the organization. When we talk about the work that we do and how it really impacts a business's bottom line, like we mean that. And a piece of that is that you are able to bring out people's gifts and talents so that you can use them in your organization to build that bottom line. If you're not doing that, like that bottom line is suffering.
Yeah. And you don't know where your people are at.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Right. And that's why the bottom line suffers, because you don't know.
Yeah.
Yes. And so even as we talk about that, right, because we've been kind of sharing like, our people's experiences aren't yours, no matter how closely they relate.
Yeah.
And I think it's interesting, like, and I'm not claiming to be like a neuro expert, but it is interesting from, just the research that I've done, like how our brains actually store information. Because right, one section will store audio, one stores visual, one does sound, an area does feelings. And we rely on, right, when we have to recreate that or share that memory, that all of those pieces are actually going to be able to connect back and the right ones. And here's the thing, it doesn't always go in the same places either. So, even when we think about like how my perspective is different, like there's parts of it that I experienced I don't even remember, or I put in the wrong story.
Yes. Yes.
So even I'm not even always sure where I'm at. So that's why it's so important that as leaders, we really engage in conversations with our team members to understand where they're feeling like they're at.
Right. Yeah. That's such a good example. I know we each can think about times where it's like we mixed up the story. We thought this happened first. I was going to blame my husband that his his brain works weird and he remembers different things in different areas. I, on the other hand, remember a lot. It's him that's might be missing parts of the story, right? Like we've been there where it's like, I know I remember, but do you really? Right? Like there are, like you said, like this is just biology, right? Like that happens in each of our brains where we remember or don't remember bits and pieces of it.
Mm-hmm.
That's why it's important, like you said, to communicate and to talk to one another, because then you can start to piece together everything that has happened. But then, even more important, you understand where your people are.
Yeah.
Right. If you have a conversation about like what I remember in this example, what I remember, you now know, okay, this is what Tia believes, thinks, values about the interaction, because that's her version of the truth of what happened.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And then understanding where Jill is, right. And understanding where you are and understand where this person is. Each of the people is so important to understand that there is more than one version of the truth. So you can find it, understand where they are. And then as a leader, you can move them right in the direction that they need to go in.
Yeah. So I know we've kind of put together a few things, like as a leader, as a professional in this space, like what do you do to help understand where people are at?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So that we're not just thinking we know.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right?
I would say, the first one that we identified is really to lead with curiosity,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like be curious about yourself as a leader, where you should grow, what you should learn next, right? Be curious about your people, whether it's your direct people or your indirect people, right? Be curious about your leaders, right? And what do they value? What do they believe? Right? Where are they going? What are their passions?
Well, I'd say even just asking questions, because how often do we go, well, I'm doing this because of this. And we just make these assumptions and we don't ask, well, how did you know that was the next thing to do? Or what about that previous experience made you decide this is the way that you'd approach it this time? So I think sometimes even in the moment, like how do you pause and lead with curiosity? Because we all assume like, oh yeah, we all assume we're going to do a corrective action, or we all assume we're going to collect more data. Like, why would we?
Right. Yeah.
What do we really need? Like what led us down that pathway?
Yes. Yes.
And I think that can be really powerful for understanding where people are at versus just like we said, kind of that assuming.
Yeah. I think one of the big things we run into is when we're rolling out a new project, right? And as a manager, or, I've seen it just as someone that's on salary, right? We sit in all these meetings, and of course we know about these projects that are happening because we're sitting in these meetings and we hear about it. And it's like, oh yeah, we're going to roll out this new, lot tracking software, right? We're going to roll this out. And then it's like, okay, Tia, you're going to roll it out for your area. And then you go and talk with the operations team and they're like, yeah, I don't want to do that. Or is this going to make my job worse? Or what is this? We've tried this before. All the things that come up. But if you lead with curiosity and ask the questions, right? And not assume that they have this information that you've had the opportunity, right? To be like, oh my gosh, how's it going to impact me? What am I going to have to do? And you've had time, but now you're trying to talk to a different group. So just asking those questions on like, hey, like this is coming down. They've been having some conversation around it. What do you think about it?
Yeah.
You tried this before. How do you think it will help you? Where will it hurt? All of those questions, right? Before you say like, okay, this is what we're going to do. This is how we're going to roll it out. This is, you know us, like we're solutions oriented. But if you take a step back and lead with that curiosity and ask those questions and just understand, right, people's beliefs and values around it, then that helps you understand, right, where they are and where you need to move them to. Because if you talk to people and they're like, oh, yes, we've been wanting this, now everyone's pumped about it, right? So you can be super pumped about it. Mm-hmm. But if you talk about it and some people are like, yes, we need it, and other people are like, I don't really want it. Now you can't come in all like cheerleader, rah, 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 because some people are going to be like, no, I really don't want this. I'm not cheering for this.
And I think sometimes going back to what you talked about, like if you're the point person sitting in meetings, you hear about it all the time. And even if you share updates with people,
Mm-hmm.
if usually when you do updates, you're just giving updates and you might hear some chatter, people might give some feedback. But when you do intentional action
Yeah.
to ask for feedback, that looks really different. So you may not have everybody stand up and be like, "Oh, we love that. We can't wait." Or people who don't, they might just be like taking in information. And I'm going to say that because that's the introvert in me, Tia, coming out, right? Where I'm like, I'm not going to be like you, like, I love it. I'll be like, I'm going to sit with this and I'm going to think about what does that really mean?
Mm-hmm.
Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
I've had leaders who just kind of assume that means I'm ready to go along.
Right.
And
Yes.
they haven't leaned in with curiosity to say, to ask those questions. And I think that's where then we have this gap on where we think people are at and that they're ready
Mhm.
versus where we are.
Yes.
And it
Yes.
happens with projects, it happens with leading, it happens with goal, it happens a lot.
Yeah, yeah. I think
Mhm.
this also leads to our second point on what you can do as a leader is to create those safe spaces, right? Where you can understand where they're at.
Mhm.
Because even as you are asking these questions, right, like you might not get an answer right away, depending on if this safe space exists or
Mhm.
you created a safe space, or maybe you have a safe space with this person, but you're not in the right environment. You're on the line or you're in a bit larger meeting or whatever it happens to be. Like as a leader, it's important for you to create those safe spaces so that you can ask those questions and get
Yes.
information from people to understand where they are.
And I think that also looks different for each person. So, right, as
Mm-hmm.
an introvert, a safe space is going to look different to me than perhaps you as an extrovert.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I love that even yesterday, one of our boot campers was talking about like that's something they're focusing on the next week, how to create more engagement by creating safe spaces. So
Yes.
they had a big team and they were talking about breaking into smaller groups.
Mm-hmm.
Or, one thing I've seen a lot is because sometimes there's what is the term for it? It's almost like leader bias, but right, like in a meeting when somebody you're like, hey, we're looking for ideas, and they blurt something out, and everybody kind of is like, oh yeah, yeah. But
Yeah.
really, there's
Yeah.
people who are like, no. But
Yeah.
you can do things like have people write it on a post-it note and put them all up on a board.
Yeah.
Or there's so many different ways to create little moments that allow people who process differently or feel safety in a different way
Yeah.
can step into that.
Yeah, yeah. I think this is huge because it's like you have to create these different spaces, right? A lot of people feel like, oh, well, they can come and talk to me in my office, right? Like that's the safe
I
space.
have an open door
I have
policy.
open door policy.
If I hear that one more time, Tia. Nope.
Right. Like no one's coming to talk to me. I have an open door policy. This is the safe space. Right. But it's like you have to create these different safe spaces. It might be your office and someone might take you up on it. Right. It might be large group, right? Someone might feel comfortable doing that. It might be those smaller groups. Right.
Mhm.
So there has to be many different safe spaces for people to talk. And sometimes you have to bring the safe space to them,
Yes.
right? So like even as I think about like I remember very vividly of a team that kept messing up on label verification. And to be fair, we had a lot of labels, a lot of labels needed.
And you're not the only one who's messed up on label verification.
No, but if you did your check right, we would not have this problem, right? And so I remember going through this. I was training like every 3 months, and I was like, I can't do this anymore, right? Because that's the corrective action is to train. I'm like, I can't continue to have this conversation. So what I did was open it up, right? So I had to do the training, right? But then I said, I remember talking with the group, and I'm like, I'm gonna go through this training because I have to, but I actually have time at the end to really talk about what is going on. And so me leading with like, I'm also very frustrated. You are frustrated. Let's get to the root cause, right? Created that safe space for us, heard some feedback on like what's working, what's not working, how can I help? How can the lab help them? All of these things, right? But that wasn't the only safe space because some people are not going to talk there. So I went to the line, right? Hey, we had this conversation. What did you think about it? Right? Like, you didn't share much. What do you think about it? Do you agree with what was said? Like what would you change? Like having those conversations, catching people in different moments, catching them in the break room, right? Like many times I went to the break room, sat down and started talking and be like, hey, I want to ask you guys about the meeting we just had. What do you think about that? And then it's just a different environment, right? That they're in, that they're more loose, right? They're having conversations, they're laughing. And again, that is a safe space that I've created for them. And, I did it multiple times.
Yeah.
So I say that to say, as a leader, we have to step outside of what we feel is best as a safe space.
Yeah. And I think what you just talked about is demonstrating, like, you have to be intentional about doing it multiple times over and over for different people.
Yes.
Because the first time you come in the break room and you ask that question, I'm going to be like, I'm not opening up. I know you're just going to take that back to other people.
Yeah.
But when you approach it maybe multiple times and you're more authentic and you're willing to like create space to listen, then I might be like, oh, Tia keeps showing up here. I'm going to let her know what I think next time.
Right. Exactly.
So it's really this intentional practice. And I think, when we talk about this, I think that's the part where I've seen leaders who are like, well, I'm always approachable. I'm always personable. I always go talk to my people every day. And, I have the open door policy. And I think that's a great starting place, right? To be there. But if you want to get the food safety culture you want, and you want to help develop people, you have to go further.
Yes, you do.
Because this goes back to the whole thing we've talked about. Like being a technical leader isn't about being nice, smart, and organized. Right? It takes being very intentional in our actions, which is why we do this.
It takes work, right? I think even also talking about this, like people are like, might be thinking, do I have time to talk to people all in these different spaces over the same topic? You got to make time for it, right? Like you have to make time for it if you want a different culture.
Yeah,
right?
If you want a different outcome.
Those spaces.
Yeah. And I think that goes into the next item we have, that you have to assume you don't know.
Yeah.
So when we step into a space where like, I don't have time to go ask all those questions, I don't have time to like, make all these safe spaces. Well, you're kind of assuming then that you know where people are at and you're moving forward.
Yes.
And I think that's the difference between it, good and great leaders. Our great leaders are like, I know, I have to assume I don't know. I have to create that space. I have to be curious. I have to really lean into people versus my busy work and firefighting.
Yes. I went to a sanitation training a couple of weeks ago, and one of the things in this training, there were scenarios, right, that you had to like, figure out different things, set up, different modes of sanitation, how you're going to save money, that type of thing. And so we've gotten these scenarios with very limited information, of course. And the next step is to ask questions. But one of the things I saw people do over and over was, oh, I know they're not working because they're probably working weekends, they're working extra hours, and people are tired. Or they're probably leaving because they're not getting paid at the right level. Or they're probably doing this because of all of these things. Oh, they're not saving money because of this. And it's like, we don't have this information at all, right?
No.
Like, we don't have it. We only have a piece of paper with literally probably 200 words. And so it's very interesting, right? The more experience you get, like I would even say, like, if the more experience you have, this one is so hard because you've seen so much. But you have to remember to take a step back and say, all of these could be possibilities, right? But let me find out what it actually is.
Yeah. And I think also recognize that this is normal brain function, right? Our brains do not like to sit with uncertainty. And this is where stories are so powerful, because if I have uncertainty, my brain will try to extract from all those imperfect memories I have to fill in a story and the blanks.
Yes.
It's meant with the greatest intent because, right, if I walked this path and there were bears for the past 10 years and I felt threatened, oh my gosh, I'm so glad my brain fills in the story so that I remember that.
Right.
But now if I'm over here and I'm thinking the bears are here and there's no bears, like I'm not helpful.
Right.
And I think that's the thing that we do as leaders, especially because we've been championed for so long to know things, right? And I know this is kind of that balance because even though we're like, oh, we're supposed to be curious and not know and dive in, but yet we've also been very championed to show up with answers.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. It's almost like doing I almost like to think about it as like the vetting process. Right? Like you might know that things like, you know, excessive overtime and not being paid well and being burnt out and overworked are reasons that people leave organizations. Like we have that information. But do you know why people are leaving your organization? And so when you have those conversations, then you start hearing people say, "Oh man, but we work every weekend and we have so much overtime and I just can't keep up. Like I want to do things on the weekend or whatever it is." Then that should connect to, "Yes, I've seen this before." Right? And we've done things in the past to help. Now let me dig even deeper and lead with curiosity that maybe I didn't figure out beforehand or learnings from beforehand, whatever it is, right? I almost think about it as like that vetting process on like I have these different options. It's like a fishbone, right? Like you have all these different options of root causes, but how do you make sure that you're tackling the right root cause? And that's through questions.
Yeah. And that's when you assume you don't know,
Mm-hmm.
which I think goes well into our fourth one, which is what's right for you isn't, or if it's not right for you, it doesn't mean that it's not right for them.
Mm. Yeah.
Because how many times have you seen maybe opportunities, whether it's roles or whether it's like development programs like Catalyst, where you're like,
Mhm.
oh, that's I don't need that, or I'm past that, or that's not my jam. Well, that might be exactly the right thing that
Yeah.
someone on your team or that has been looking for.
Yes. Yes. That, you know what? That I like these. I really like these points, obviously, because this is our talk. But it just reminds you of the things the mistakes, right, that leaders really make, where
We've all done it.
we've all done it, right? And it's it really is tough being a leader, and you have a lot of things coming at you. But if you come from the mindset, right, that perspective of just because it's not right for me doesn't mean it's not right for someone else. So I need to explore that, right? And I need to figure out like where are people at. This is exactly what we're talking about. Where are people at?
Yeah.
And if it's a right opportunity for them. Many times as leaders, because we have a lot on our plate, we just almost dismiss things.
Mm-hmm.
Like, oh, we don't need to do this because I feel we're in a good spot, or I feel this, or I'm in a good spot.
Yeah.
Right. And if you're leading with that, I feel this, or I, then you're probably missing some things. You're probably assuming things. And honestly, you're taking away opportunities from someone else to grow.
Yeah. And I think that's the big part that, right, as leaders, we're supposed to help people grow and share their gifts.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so when we're unsure of where they're at or we're making assumptions about where they're at, we may not be able to fully help them, put their gifts into the world.
Mm.
And
Yeah.
that's what we're supposed to do.
Mm-hmm.
So, how do we really create that environment, really that culture where we
Yeah.
do that?
Yeah. It makes me think about the person you were talking about that we talked to right before this, that said, they are a high performer, right? And they were seen as a high performer in their organization, but their organization didn't use them in that way, right? Like they took away opportunities really for this person to grow for their own reasons, right? Like I don't know what their reasons are, but they had them and they took away these opportunities for this person to grow
Yeah.
um, because they felt, right, like without having the conversation about where that person is.
Yeah. And, that's something that stifles the entire organization, right?
Yeah.
Because as an organization, we're looking to grow, develop, move, make more money,
Mhm.
blah, 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 all this stuff.
Right.
So every time we ask someone to step back, play small, or we don't give them those opportunities, we've just like shrunk down versus helping make bigger.
Yes. Yes. It's important when you are making someone feel like they need to shrink. like they're not going to shrink to where you think they should shrink to. They're probably going to shrink a lot smaller, and you're not going to be able to get out of that person what you need, just from, like you said, a business growth and organizational growth. Like, you're not going to be able to get what you need from that person. And then it's wasted talent.
Oh, it is. And, that's a whole nother show. It's that, like, the Maslow's hierarchy for like employee engagement. Like, you've knocked them down on that scale, or even a trust ladder, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it takes a long time to build back up. So it's really only in our best interest as leaders for our organization to keep building people up and knowing where they're at so we can help them get ready for the next spot.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But this takes a mindset shift,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like, if this is something that we said it a few times, like, this is not easy, and it might not come easily to you to be able to switch that mindset and start thinking about it a little bit differently.
But you can. It's like riding a bike, right? You just need practice. You got to do it a couple times and get better. Before you know it, you'll be doing like the Tour de France or something.
Right. Yeah. Like, they all started somewhere, right? But it's that mindset shift on, like, I need to start looking at things differently. And when we talk about it at Catalyst, like, we're not going to be able to move food safety culture forward the way that we want to using the same tools we've been using for decades.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Like, that's just not going to happen. It's the question that we get all the time, is like, man, we've been working at food safety culture. We've been saying this buzzword, food safety culture, for so long, but nothing's changing. That's because we're trying to use the same tools over and over, right?
Yeah,
like, these
slightly different.
They're slightly different, right?
Instead of a half-inch wrench, I'm doing a 3/4-inch wrench. Well, it's still a wrench.
It's still a wrench, right? And it's still the same tool that is not moving us forward. And so we have to, in order for us to even pick up a different tool, we have to shift that mindset.
Yeah.
And we have to think about, okay, instead of thinking about it from my perspective, how do I lean into others? And how do I start thinking about others' perspectives, right? And taking the time, right, to understand where people are at, so that I can truly move them to the next step.
Yeah. And, since we do have our technical mindset principles, and if somebody wants a copy of those, just drop us a note at hello@foodsafetycatalyst.com, and we'll send you those over, because these are a great just starting place to start maybe challenging yourself or reflecting on what you do and where you've been with where's your mindset and how are you looking at what you're doing, because that's where it starts, right? If you can't look at how you're doing things and your contribution, you'll not be able to objectively see what others are doing. And to that next level of, like, how do we do things? So this kind of gives an outline of that, and we're happy to share that because right, it takes every single one of us stepping outside our comfort zone to do things different so that we can help people grow, help shift culture.
Yeah.
And we'll love assuming we know where people are at.
Yeah. Yes. And we'll love your feedback too, because, some of the things people are like, yeah, I can see that. Like, that's something that I'm working on. But even like one we brought up today on, like, there's more than one version of the truth. I remember when we dropped this mindset and people were like, what? There's one truth. There's one truth. Right. But just like we talked about today, there are so many different perspectives, and someone's truth might not be your truth.
Yeah. I mean, just think, this to me always goes back to even like corrective actions. Like, right, when you get a corrective action and you walk out and you're like, well, we have to we want to interview and hear from people, right? You go out and you ask all different people, different roles, different like levels, whatever, like what happened, and you're going to get a different version every time.
Yes. Yeah.
And I love it because even there, we're still trying to distill it down to one truth, because that's what we've been taught to do.
Yeah.
And weave through the story and find the one that we feel like fits the puzzle pieces best. Yeah. But yet they all are versions.
Exactly. And we're trying to figure out as leaders, how do they all work together? Right? How do all these different versions of the truth work together? How do we communicate and provide clarity so that we're all seeing the truth for our team, right? And for our facility or maybe for our organization. And so that is when you talk about like these neural pathways, Jill, and how our brains store information, like I mean, it just farther proves that culture is not easy, right?
Yeah.
Sustaining a culture, building a great culture, because you already have culture, right? But building a great culture, like that's very hard to do because you're literally working against people's minds, right? You're trying to keep everyone's mind in line with the vision and the mission and how we work together,
Yeah.
and that tied with critical thinking and all of those things. So it's one of the reasons why culture is not a destination. It really is a journey, because at any moment, right, someone's perspective can change, right? Maybe
Yeah.
and a lot of people think about it as like someone joined the organization or someone left the organization. But I can go to a conference and hear a talk, and now my perspective has changed.
Yeah.
And so people don't think about that, but that's why culture is hard.
Well, I'm going to say, I think it is hard because of that, because of the assumptions. But I think the other part that we see most, this is just Jill and her like soapbox talking, but it's the inconsistency we have when it comes to being intentional about being human centric.
Yes. Yes.
Because I think there's this, we know, like, to totally shift culture, it's, what do they say, 3 to 5 years. But if we're really intentional on what we're going to do, and I'm going to say, we had some problems. Let's say even we had a culture around foreign material that was kind of like, yeah, there's another one.
Yeah.
We shifted the culture because we were on it every single day.
Yeah. Yes.
We, making it like, nope, it's not just, oh, here's another one. Like, no, that's a problem.
Mm-hmm.
How are we going to do this together? And that's a small example, but every day we were talking about foreign material and how we can work together every day. We didn't drop the ball. Had we, which we had done before, right? Like, oh my gosh, foreign material. Ah! Okay, now we're on to the next thing.
Right.
And guess what? That didn't stick because we were on to the next fire.
Right.
And we had seen that so many times over that really it was like the pain of having to do that again. But like, that consistency is what's needed. And to go back to our topic today, when we think about where people are at, it also is consistency.
Yeah.
Asking questions and creating safe spaces, in really understanding like where they are versus assuming.
Yes, yes. I love that example, Jill, because I'm sure there were times when you all were like, I don't want to talk about foreign material today. But you stuck with it, right? To change that culture.
We did, and involved other people. So it wasn't just like in our little team huddle, but it was with maintenance, it was with operations, it was with sales, it was with, right, even like logistics, because they're the ones getting the call, like, don't send that product. Right, they're being affected too. So it's like everybody, sanitation, everybody's involved. And so that was the only way we could get the awareness and the ability to shift how we were thinking about it.
Yeah. And we see that in other cases, right? Like I always bring it back to marketing, right? Someone that's doing like a marketing campaign and you see their pizza every day on your TV, on your social media, because they are intentionally reinforcing what they want you to do. Yeah. And like, think about those campaigns, right? Or like even special times, like during the Super Bowl, right? Like you see those commercials over and over. You can tell I must be hungry or something. But you
or
see
it's football season, something like that.
That's true. But you see it over and over, and those are some things that we can learn from, right? And where it's like it doesn't seem like it's related, but it is, in the sense of like you want to influence someone to do something, right? Or to take on this persona, or to take on this culture, right? And be a part of that culture and live in that culture. And so that doesn't happen because you saw a commercial once. That converts very little people. It's if you continue to see it over and over in the conversations. This is another reason why I loved your example, Jill, because you said we talked about it. It wasn't just, oh, we put up a poster on the wall and that was it. No, like you had conversations about it every day.
It was essentially all consuming, which sounds crazy, but I mean, it was. So
We'll have to ask, did it work?
yeah. Yeah, we had massive improvements.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
You know,
It does work, but once again, it's also, you know, continuing that and then building the systems around that to support it.
yeah.
I think that's
Yes.
the other part, because no matter how much, yeah, I'll pick on the foreign material. No matter how much we had those conversations, if we still had SOPs that weren't, helpful, or if we still
Mhm.
had policies that were unclear, or if we still, had people that, we didn't see eye to eye on disposition, like
Mm,
those
mm.
things are the things that create challenges. So it's getting everybody involved and then putting it into the system. So that's, you always talk about like at Gen Mills, right? Like
Mhm.
this is just how we do things.
Yeah.
This is
Yeah.
how we do things. That's culture.
That's culture. That's
And the
culture.
same thing, and I know we talk a lot about once again, kind of the operational or technical parts of food safety as the examples to be relatable to,
Yeah.
but the same thing happens for people.
Mhm.
So, right, the more, right, when I started doing more intentional one-on-ones, guess what? Like we had much more connection and created more safe spaces.
Mhm. Mhm.
When we started having more team gatherings where we were in the same space, oh my gosh, all of a sudden our team interacted in different ways and we had better engagement.
Mhm. Yeah.
But those are the things that we had to stay focused on doing on a regular basis so that we could know where people were at, how they
Mhm.
were feeling, how they were engaging.
Yeah. Yes.
And it didn't matter if we had fires.
Mhm.
Sometimes we
Yeah.
just fought the fires together.
Mhm.
It didn't
Mhm.
matter how much work we had because there was always more work to do. But it was really about putting people and the team in front of all of those things that pull us.
Yes, yes, and being intentional about that. Yes, definitely, because you're right. I think people look at the technical things and like it's like yes, we'll roll out those systems and those different place things around it, but people, you have to do the same things. You have to
Mhm.
be intentional because like when we talk about creating safe spaces, that does not happen overnight.
Mhm.
Right. You can't just be like, hey, I'm safe to talk to me in large groups, small groups, one-on-one, like just talk to me. That it takes intention to build that trust in those relationships and to show, right, that you are someone that they can trust you.
Mhm.
And that isn't, if they tell you something that's sensitive, that is going to stay with you, right?
Mhm.
Or, if they tell you their opinion on something and it might not be the same opinion you have, that they're not going to find themselves in a corrective action situation, right? So it's like those things take time to do and you have to be intentional about it.
But it's worth it.
It's
It
so worth
is
it.
so worth it.
It's so worth it. It is worth it. It's worth it for yourself as a leader. Like when you are a leader of a strong team, of a team that feels like they can bring their whole self to work and that they can bring all of their talents and, like that leader is like, whew, I know my team got it. Like they got
Yeah.
it. And I could leave it with them, right? And I can actually do my job, right, as a leader. And
Mhm.
so when teams are balanced like that, like everyone is happy.
It is. And and I also, a lot of times we hear people who say, "Oh, yeah, that's a great program. I'm already a good leader."
Yeah.
We love that. We love when people are like, "I know I'm doing good things here already."
Yeah.
But I would also challenge people to say, when we're really in that space of being good leaders, we also are really good at reflecting and asking where we're contributing and how we contribute more and different.
Yeah. And how can I improve? Right?
Yeah.
Like what are areas that I can improve in or refine,
Mhm.
that can make me an even greater leader. And we know things change all the time, right? The people coming into the workforce is changing, the people that are leaving is changing. COVID has changed the world. So we have to adapt. We have to continue to pour into ourselves because if you're not and you're stagnant, right? In a very short period of time, 18 months, you're going to be old news, right? And you're no longer going to be a great leader if you are not pouring into yourself.
Yeah, exactly. Whew.
Yeah.
I know we could talk about this all day, but we are coming up to the top of the hour again already. So
We are. So what do we want people to walk away with. And I think it's those four
Yeah.
things,
I
right?
think it's that awareness, like your people aren't where you're at, number
Mhm,
one.
mhm. Yeah. And ask those questions, right? Lead with curiosity. Create these safe spaces so that you can understand, like,
Mhm.
where are they, right? And related to where you want to go,
Yeah.
you know?
Don't assume,
No.
and then don't pass up opportunities because it's not right for you, but may be right for someone else.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yes.
Awesome.
I love this conversation. I love it that it was sparked by just a random conversation, we had over the last week. But I think it's very top of mind for people as they think about food safety culture and as they think
Mhm.
about becoming just better leaders.
Absolutely. So
All
we
right.
appreciate having everybody here with us. Thank you so much. And, of course, we'll be back here same time, same place next week. So we look forward to seeing you. Make it
See
a
you
great
next.
week.
Bye.